Good morning. Welcome to the March 14th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. We only have 2 discussion items this morning, but I would ask commissioners to hold questions and comments until the conclusion of any presentations. We start every meeting with the opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda, but we do not have any members of the public here today. So we will go right into new business as there are no old business items, which is a new experience for all of us. Item C.1, text change TC 123, stormwater management regulations. This is a city-initiated amendment to stormwater management regulations to comply with the new nutrient strategy stormwater rule and other state requirements. We will start with a staff presentation from Ben Brown.
Good morning, Commissioners. I am Ben Brown from the Engineering Services Department in the Stormwater Management Group. Yep. So here to talk today about required changes for nutrient treatment of stormwater, and I'll get into the required part. That is a very key portion of this. So the state of North Carolina through the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality dictates what the city has to do for water quality treatment for all their new development, and those regulations have been in place at the city since 2001. They've had a model ordinance since 1999. Well, they have updated their model ordinance, and so they would like the other cities to follow suit that are adherent to these water quality statutes, and it requires us to update our ordinance and also to update the reporting that we do on an annual basis to the state as far as our stormwater management program. The changes are not as much as we thought they were going to be, but they have a couple things. Added some definitions specific to the stormwater section, which is a little bit different than other places in the UDO. Usually we use a general chapter for definitions, but there were so specific stormwater definitions, we decided to add these to the actual chapter. The term impervious area, which some of you may be acquainted with, the state is looking to change that to built upon area, and so that was one of their big things they wanted to change. So that reference to impervious area is becoming built upon area. We are adopting the state language for common plan of development, which speaks to multiple lots being developed by a single developer in a certain subdivision or development area. Added exemptions for single-family lots that are greater than an acre with less than 5% built-upon area, which we don't see a ton in Raleigh, but it's kind of state mandate. Also added an exemption for agriculture to comply with state statute, and that's something that our stormwater code has needed for a few years now. And it also, the other major changes were to the nutrient treatment for stormwater, which I'll go into next. So the target rate, and if I get to, you don't have to wait till the end, you can stop me halfway through if I get too much into details on things like this. The target rate for nitrogen loading, which is the target nutrient for the Neuse River Basin, is 3.6 pounds per acre per year leaving your site, or for the entire Neuse River Basin, it's kind of 3.6. So how you get there is kind of where the rubber meets the road as far as private development. So the proposed changes would have all sites with more than 24% built upon area must utilize a primary stormwater control measure before using a buy down option to kind of meet their target loading rate. Currently, how it works is we have a rate you must hit, whether you're commercial or residential, before you can utilize that buy down. Now, this would kind of say anything over 24% built upon area or impervious area must utilize some sort of primary stormwater control measure, which is like a wet pond, a bioretention area, a constructed wetland, before they can utilize an off-site buy down to a private mitigation bank to kind of meet their target loading rate. And all sites utilize these off-site payments on the whole to kind of get those rates, because getting down to a certain level is not as difficult, but to get to 3.6, they're usually using those off-site buy downs through private mitigation banks. Sorry, I've only had a quarter cup of coffee so far. To meet the 3.6 is common practice. And all sites with less than 24% built upon area proposed may use the off-site buy down right off the bat, and they don't have to use the stormwater control measure. In Raleigh, the majority of our sites are proposing more than 24% built upon area, just to kind of give you a little bit of a look at that. And all sites must use, the other big change is that all sites must use a new state-approved loading tool to estimate the water quality treatment by engineers and designers and state regulators. This is called the SNAP tool. And basically, this is a tool that has been used in the Falls Lake and Jordan Lake areas, but they're expanding it to use it in the entire kind of Neuse River Basin. So it's a tool that the state has developed, and they are in charge of the training, which I'll get into in a couple slides, and training city staff and also designers on this tool. So, and it's also going to be how we report out our development activity to the state as well. There are some impacts on city projects. For linear projects, they may now utilize off-site mitigation credits or that off-site buy-down regardless of their nutrient loading rate. These are basically roadways and sidewalks. Currently, for City of Raleigh linear projects, that is not the case, and it always makes it difficult because usually these linear projects don't have a lot of land area that they're dealing with. So for a linear project to install a stormwater control measure is kind of difficult because they're having to go back to adjacent landowners and buy more property and sort of thing. So this is similar to how the state treats NCDOT currently. So they would now, with this change, allow local governments to utilize the same direction as NCDOT does. For nonlinear projects like buildings, parks, civic towers, things like that, they would still be subject to the same ordinance changes that I just talked about as far as that 24% kind of caveat. Outreach activities. So this is all kind of happening fairly quick compared to how the city usually likes to do things. So basically, the month of November, the State Environmental Management Commission said the first 9 programs in the Neuse River Basin, which Raleigh was a part of, would have to adopt these ordinance by May, essentially, to kind of go through. So we got the tech changes going and working, and so that's kind of why we're in the period we are now. And the outreach we're kind of doing, just to kind of show you, we created our own webpage for this. All right, it actually worked. Kind of going through what the changes are, kind of what I just talked about, and why it's being made, the summary of the text changes, and then also training and outreach. So like I talked about or referenced a bit earlier, is that the state is holding SNAP tool workshops or loading tool workshops from NCDEQ and NC State to kind of take designers and regulators too through the SNAP tool, because we haven't had day-to-day interaction with it. We've seen kind of the alpha and beta versions of this tool, but we haven't necessarily worked the final tool like with an actual site. So that'll be on March 27th. That'll be an intro to kind of the tool for everybody. And then on March 28th, that's kind of their local government only training, which will be in the morning, I believe. No, maybe the afternoon, I'm sorry. And then on April 26th, they're holding a general training open to the entire public through NC State to kind of go through. But in addition to that, the city is holding its own webinar on April 20th to go through with our local designers and developers to talk about submittal requirements now with these new regulations and kind of what that'll look like. So, April 20th, yes. And we were hoping to have the first email out about that before the Planning Commission meeting, but that did not occur. But we hope to have it this week to kind of get that out to developers so they can get on their calendar. Perfect. Like I mentioned, the city training, targeted emails, and then also as people are asking for, quote, one-on-one meetings to talk about the tool and things like that, we are meeting with the Home Builders Association tomorrow, actually, to go over this text change and kind of what the impacts will be. And then any new submittal guidance will be on our webpage and kind of updated through these emails and things like that. So next steps, Planning Commission, you all will just review this and send a recommendation back to council, and then at that point, City Council will schedule a public hearing and then hold it for the text change. And the text change does need to become effective in the month of May 2023 per state regulation. So I'm happy to answer any questions and things like that, but this is something that the state is kind of driving the bus on our regulation. So this really isn't a city-initiated choice or update to our regulations. But we don't necessarily disagree with it. We just disagree with the timing of it, I guess, would be the only thing that we would say on that. So,
Okay.
any questions?
I'm going to shift to questions and comments from commissioners, and I'll start off with there was an unanswered three-part question on the engagement portal. You might just take the opportunity to get the answers to those out there at this point.
Yep. We were keeping up pretty well with it through yesterday, but I'm not sure what has come up since then. So
It might have been just what was uploaded in our agenda.
okay. I'm good with anyone else. I've studied. I'm ready.
I know, I could read them to you if you want me to. But I figured those are the types of questions that you probably need to see to be able to answer
Oh, okay.
coherently.
I was hoping you were going to walk me through it.
I can walk you through it. I think I know the answers. I'm gonna rely on
No, it's fine.
Keegan.
And if there's any,
It's answered already.
okay.
Can you just do another download of it and then send it out? Thank you. Okay. And then it looked like perhaps Commissioner Elder had a question.
Just had a question about the mitigation. Is there a requirement that the mitigation happens within a certain proximity of where the impacts are? Is that in the same basin or?
So yeah, it's in the upper Neuse River Basin is where like that offsite mitigation has to occur. So if you're used to the terminology, it's in like the same HUC, which is kind of the upper Neuse River Basin, which is, what does HUC stand for? Anyone remember? Hydrologic Unit Code, which is for the upper Neuse Basin. So, but it has to be in this.
So is it typical for municipalities to have a requirement that it happens within their jurisdiction or something so that the mitigation is realized in the same place that the impacts are?
That's a possibility, and it is allowable, although I don't know of any local governments that have done it to kind of set their own mitigation banking like that. But I know Raleigh hasn't done it, and I'm not sure of any larger community that has done it. The issue that I would see with Raleigh, because a lot of these mitigation banks are essentially like either large stormwater devices or large swaths of open space. And Raleigh, as a jurisdiction, does not have space for either, kind of, I would say, right now. So it's possible, but it's not something that's on our agenda as of yet because we're not sure it's
Sure.
feasible.
I was just thinking like for Raleigh citizens, right? Like if the impacts are happening here, but the mitigation's happening somewhere else in the basin, then maybe it's not as impactful for Raleigh citizens as it could be. But like I was just curious about whether or not that's something that typically happens.
As far as for the history of the Neuse rules since 2001, that's essentially what has been happening. The mitigation offset payments have been going to the upper Neuse Basin, so it's been broad scale. Raleigh's been included in that, but it's not necessarily local to the different watersheds in Raleigh, like specifically zoomed into it. So.
Additional questions or comments? Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I haven't had my coffee either, so I'll try to be clear in my question. As an example, if there's a site that had, existing site that had multiple phases of redevelopment, and it was going to be phased, and there's future phases that may impact runoff, would the stormwater treatment on site need to be in place for all of the development prior to those other future phases getting developed in the future, or is it going to? I'm just not sure how this actually works.
No.
For a long-term phased.
So it all depends. Not to be the engineer's answer there, but if you're platting out the specific lots in those phases, then we do ask that you go ahead and make those mitigation payments. But if you're just reserving areas like for future phases and not necessarily platting the individual lots, then as those phases come in, then we would ensure compliance. The only difference would be that if you're doing all of it at once, you kind of know what regulations you're dealing with the day you're dealing with it. If you're doing future phases could have more stormwater requirements because more could get added before those future phases are platted out. But that's how we process something with like phase development like that.
Okay. Two more quick, one question and a comment. The time under section 5D3, the as-built are required to be submitted. Was there a time frame for the owner to submit those back? I didn't see anything in the language.
Yep. So normally how we process those, like if you're a commercial building, it's usually one building, one CO. And so before you get your CO, you have to submit your as-built and get it accepted by the city, and then we will release the CO to you. For like a residential subdivision, once you get to 75% of your COs kind of issued, that's when we want those as-built, and then we won't go over that 75% amount until we accept the as-built, and then we'll just release the other COs for the like remaining 25%. So depending on what you're doing, it's a little bit different, but.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And then just, I'm sorry, this is nitpicky, but there's some formatting, text change, there's like indents and spacing between words that throughout I think should be tightened up. So.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Otwell, I believe you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I understand this was mandated by the state. How much flexibility did the city have in implementing the state's directives? Is this word for word what came down from the legislature, or is it a interpretation?
It's word for word, I would say. All the nutrient regulations, like there's a little bit of gray area with the built upon area and impervious area because we have impervious area listed in multiple places in our code, and especially for our EPA permit, we have impervious area defined a little bit differently. But as far as the nutrient reduction stuff, that's word for word.
And this is completely separate from the issue of like water runoff volume. Am I understanding that correctly? Like we see a lot of redevelopment cases where we're assured that the new state of the development will require as much or less stormwater runoff than the current state of the land. And this is more about nutrient loading than about volume of runoff before and after. Do I have that correct?
Correct. So in its most basic form, like our stormwater regulations has two basic parts. One is a water quality section and one is a water quantity section. So this is just looking at the water quality section, and the water quality regulations are staying the same as they are today. So those aren't changing.
And one last thing. I think you mentioned that there's not a lot of impact. We don't have that many developments where there's less than 24% of the land being developed. Do you have any kind of idea of the magnitude of those numbers, like how many properties or what number of properties exist? Just wild.
That was just an anecdotal from just the development and redevelopment plans that we normally see. As far as across Raleigh, I'm not sure how that would look, but one thing that was in my notes to do verbally, which I'm glad you said that because it reminded me, was that existing impervious that has existed prior to 2001 or been permitted from 2001 until today can't be regulated with this ordinance. It's just new impervious or built upon area that's permitted after May of 2023. So
Thank you.
We have a question. Mr. Brown, you just mentioned about grandfathered lots. How did we determine the magnitude or the area of the grandfathered lots? I see we changed it from all lots to greater than 1 acre. So I'm just curious as to how that determination was made.
So the state regulations don't really start until you get to 1 acre. And so the grandfathered lots is something that the city added back in 2017 to look at stormwater treatment on these smaller infill lots. So the only thing we really changed on that section of the ordinance was to incorporate the common plan of development, which could catch some of these grandfathered lots in that state term, but also to change the impervious area to built upon area. So the grandfathered lots still are looking at their impervious percentage based on their zoning. But the reason the acre cutoff is there because the state really doesn't deal with properties less than an acre in their model ordinance language. They kind of leave that to the local governments.
additional questions or comments from commissioners? Yep. Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Chair Fox, I move to, for text change TC 123 Stormwater Management Regulations, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 14th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to approve, recommend approval for TC 123. Commissioner Bennett has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hand, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda is item C.2, review of the equity and climate change analysis section of the rezoning staff report, presented by Ira Mabel.
Yes, good morning. Ira Mabel, Planning and Development. I did print some handouts, which are just the backup material. I thought it would be easier for people to have them in front of them as we discuss this. So the comprehensive planning staff added a racial equity analysis alongside the climate change analysis 2 years ago now, largely in part in response to a request from Planning Commission to do so. And that has been operating, and you have been receiving staff reports now for all new business since sometime in 2021. I don't remember the exact month, but just about 2 years. The department's most recent business plan includes under one of the goals, so it's structured similar if you've ever looked at the city's strategic plan. Our business plan has 5 goals, I believe, and under one of them is to add a racial equity analysis in other staff reports that we write, and also plans. That's a bit of a separate, involves like structuring our RFQs and scopes of work and kind of thing. But for the staff reports side, the team assigned to that initiative, the first step was to look at the one we have already and try to see if it's working as we thought it was, if we should improve it or change it in any way before we look to a broader implementation across the department. So as the primary decision-making board, you and City Council, I believe, are the ones who read the staff report the most. That is what we're here today to discuss with you, to hear how that has helped you or not in your decision-making and thinking of rezoning cases. I will say we did a similar thing with the staff report authors. The survey was different a little bit. But for sure, the main focus of the change is going to be on you and the public and people who read the report, more so than the people who have to write it. So I do want to say before we get into the results, well, first of all, thank you for those of you who filled it out. The other thing is definitely not scientific. Even if 100% of Planning Commission had responded, that's still a very, very small sample size. And it was not to be the only point of discussion. It was just sort of to give us some place to begin this discussion with the Commission. So sort of something to react to, so to speak. So the first pair of questions, and I like to ask whenever I can in a survey, we'll get to it in the second question, but the first pair of questions was just how useful each individual subsection are. So I did print out the blank section, which includes 6, 7 if you include the open-ended questions parts. So this was just like, how useful is this information for you? Again, I don't want to draw very strong conclusions, but these are rough, how the survey software summarized the result. I didn't do any extra. This is Microsoft Forms sort of gave me a chart. I will point out as we go, just things to keep an eye on. The housing energy analysis tended to be towards the bottom, and the EJ screen tool tended to be towards the top in general. You can see this is the same question as this first one, how useful is it, but relative to all others. So I do like asking people this question on all surveys to make you actually rank things against each other. I think is a useful mental exercise. So the first question was sort of, in a vacuum, how useful is this? The second question is, put these in order. So one of them has to be last. And that was the housing and energy analysis table again. And again, the EJ screen was pretty high. And the rest sort of floated around in between, generally in the middle. We also asked if any of these were confusing to you. And so I think no one seemed overly confused about any of them in particular, which is good. I think that's a great place to start, is that no one is sort of scratching their heads about what this is saying or what's in it. But again, a couple that sort of were at the top for both and stayed at the top for both, the housing supply, which is the one that asks about sort of what is existing housing today. It's on the page 2. And then the energy analysis again towards the bottom. And that was also true when we forced to rank. So I'm not going to claim I know what the software is weighting. You can see like this top one has a big brown bar, which is most people are ranked it in the middle. So I guess when it was properly weighted, everyone's second or third choice became the sort of at the top, but generally thought of as being, at the very least, like you knew what the section was telling you. And then there were some open-ended boxes just asking you if things could be improved. So I did summarize these, comment about just sort of streamlining it. I will say about streamlining, we did fairly recently overhaul the report itself to the sum total was to make it shorter. That had a couple of reasons. One was to reduce redundancy for staff. There was a lot of places we had to write the same information, which could cause error as the case changed over time. And by the time the case got to council, there was a lot of like, well, which thing is right? It's on 4 different pages. So to reduce redundancy also makes it faster to produce, but and also faster for everyone, for Planning Commission and the public to read and understand and stuff. But we did not do that for this section at all. So that effort was everything but this and the transportation analysis. So we didn't. It's not that we don't disagree; it could be streamlined, but we wanted to have this discussion sort of on its own. Comment about more clearly linking it to the comp plan policy analysis. A request to highlight when results are very different than typical, and that could be either for rezoning cases, I guess, or for just the city data. And that's sort of similar to the point about life expectancy, which is like, is there a big variety? Like, what should you be thinking about? Some question about just reorganization, and then links. There are links to some of the primary data sources, but not all of them. So we can certainly add that. But I believe this comment was about just like giving you those rather than making this sort of 6-page snapshot. We asked if anything you felt was missing. So there was a comment that there is some additional research required. A question about if there's a tool about environmental justice like the EJ screen tool. And I will say here, I don't know. I didn't answer any of these questions. These are just displayed to you. Obviously, there's more work for the initiative team to moving forward and for comp planning staff. Question about adding flood maps, which we certainly do have in IMAPs. A financial analysis of various things, and then a couple things about transportation, which again, transportation's still in the room, but they have been some discussions over the years about how transportation thinks about traffic studies and their modeling and moving more towards the vehicle miles traveled. So, like I said, when we looked at the staff report as a whole, these were the 2 sections that we left because we were anticipating them to have their own independent. I know transportation staff is sort of doing a lot of internal work, thinking about how they do that, which might require some code changes and changes to the street plan manual. So a little bit more lifting than just changing the sort of Word document template for us. And then there was a final question about just other thoughts that we didn't ask about. So request to add something about permitted uses, some sort of permitted use table. Just a comment that the final narrative questions are duplicative, which I will say is true, and you sort of can't write them without having looked at the data. So it's a bit of a catch-22 there. Just a comment that the trade reviews are more helpful, and that this isn't really linked to displacement. So again, that's sort of a raw output for you without much, I hope, editorializing from me. Hoping to have the discussion here. The next step is comp planning staff and the initiative team, which is more people from the department than that. We'll think about if there are changes to this. I will say that, this cannot be put in every single staff report. So, like quasi-judicial processes, the standard of evidence is different. So definitely we'll have to think harder if and what racial equity analysis goes into those things. But there are other documents that we produce, but this will not be a fit for every single thing, but it's certainly, as the one that we have, the place we're going to start thinking about. This will take some number of months or years as staff resources allow. So that's all I have. I'm sort of welcome to how the chair wishes to go about hearing additional feedback for us or requests or what have you. But
I know I stated it earlier, but for the purposes of the record, there are no members of the public here to speak on this item. So I'll open it up for questions or comments from commissioners. Commissioner Raines?
Thanks, Ira. One of the comments from the group on the responses were vehicle miles traveled. I think that'd be a nice thing to know under the transportation analysis, to add that as a section or line item. This is a detail, and there may be reasons for it, but under housing supply and affordability, there's a question, is it within walking distance of transit? I'm just wondering if I know that's related to the housing, but should that be under the transportation portion? I don't know, that's more of a open question, but sorry, we're going through my notes here. Under land use history, there's information about when the property was annexed to the city or originally developed. I'm just wondering if some of this stuff could be summarized in the summary if there's known issues and versus having a category here. That's a comment, not a suggestion. That's all I got for today. Thanks.
Any additional questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you, Chair Fox. Thank you, Ira. I find this very useful. Obviously, one of the things I've noticed in the demographic indicators, I don't know if applicants get to see this prior to our discussions, but sometimes we'll have a linguistically isolated population and the percentage might be notable. And we'll ask, well, was there any type of specific outreach to that group? And generally the answer is no. So I'm wondering how this information might be used to help the engagement process.
Sure. That's a very good question. So there's a phase of the rezoning request analysis that you never see, which is when an applicant submits a request, it goes out to staff for review. So all the trade reviews happen fairly early. So we send it to transportation and stormwater and historic preservation and everyone who's now in the sort of checkbox section. And their comments go to the applicant. They're in the public, you can see them, they're public information, they're on the permit development portal. Staff also sends them some basic information, like this is the future land use map and urban form map category. And whatever the case planner is sort of projecting a list of policies that might be relevant. It's sort of like the first pass of the comp plan. Often that list does get shorter as you think about, like, does this really apply and what would I write about? But it's sort of a general overview of, this request is near a BRT station. Here are all the BRT policies that you might see in your staff report. We do not, to date, we don't give them demographic information at all, really, until they see the staff report. So I don't, again, not speaking on behalf of comp planning as just the lone representative here, but could be possible to add that to that review, to do some initial, to fill out this table during the initial review and just have that as information. Would be providing them much earlier. Yeah. So the answer to your question is no, we don't send it, but we certainly could, and there is communication with them early about other things.
I think that could be helpful.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when we hear that no one showed up at a meeting or there was no feedback on a case, it may not necessarily be that no one cared.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that the right engagement procedures, well, I won't say right, but the people weren't engaged. Maybe they didn't know about it. Maybe they spoke a different language or something. And so I could see that would be helpful in terms of at least making sure everyone affected or potentially affected knew about it and had the opportunity to participate in the process.
I think that's a great idea. That's a great observation. Commissioner Lampman?
I just wanted to offer a compliment. Over the past couple years, you guys have all just really put together a lot of really incredible information to support the community and kind of fill some gaps. And I mean, it's a huge amount of work, and it's very much appreciated. And I appreciate the Planning Commission as well and the Planning Department for the level of commitment to the education and the engagement. So I think it's really great in these changes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. If there are no other comments, Ira, can you remind us of the next steps?
So the next steps will depend a little bit on staff. So this is a sort of our own internal plan. I think most likely, so when we designed this staff report, there was a lot of internal discussion about, what's feasible to put in it, what was appropriate to put in it. I think we'll probably have a very similar, with the results of this discussion and the staff discussion, sort of take another crack at it. And then the way we did it last time was we sort of filled out the section for a couple example cases and brought those back to sort of show you all what it would look like. So I imagine any overhaul to this particular section would look like that again. And I can't recall if since this does go to council, we do alert them. I don't remember off the top of my head if that was just a sort of a manager's like a weekly update. I don't think we made a formal presentation. It was sort of like, here's the background. I will say too, which I didn't mention, like our intent of this discussion was not to not have to do this or make this less or shorter or anything. It was to validate that it is working and doing what we want before we do it more. So if the answer is nothing happens to this, that could all very well be the next step, which is nothing happens to this. And we just look at all the other staff reports we write and try to copy it as close as we can, given those business processes. So it could be nothing happens, and that, Bynum and everyone in comp planning here's all this and says like, well, maybe there's a couple of reorganizations or tweaks, but we'll have to see. But if there is a change, I can assure you that we'll be back to make you aware.
Were there any revelations for staff based on our answers in correlation to how much effort it takes for you all to put that together?
Yeah, so the staff questions were a bit different. And staff gave a lot more. I did send it to staff too, who are no longer even with the unit anymore, but like old, sometimes not even with the city anymore. There was a lot of more mechanical about how it works. But also, I think the staff point of view includes you, but also includes like when we hear questions from the public about where they're confused. So for an author, there's a lot more audiences that the whole report itself, let alone this section, has to serve. So there's a lot of like, this is still confusing for the public, right? And that's sort of anecdotal when I get, a call from someone who's like, what does this mean on page whatever? So there was a lot more there, I think, to the way it relates to the rest of the comp plan analysis. I think it came into play a lot more. There were questions about like how long it takes and how much work it is, but really it was like, how does this change the comp plan consistency? Does this help very much? And sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. I think that says a lot more, or oftentimes we'll say more about the comp plan itself than than this section, which is sort of a different question. But yeah, I want to say, the staff will do whatever. I mean, if this, even if this is the most time intensive by far and effortful by far, like the point is to serve the goal of the city's equity plan and the department's equity plan. So there may be some things that we tweak just where we've identified inefficiencies on our own, but it was a lot of like, more comments about how it relates to other stuff that we do either in the staff report or outside in the rest of the process. That was a
Commissioner
bit of a
Lampman?
rambly answer, I'm sorry.
I had one idea.
Sure.
I was reading through the comments and someone said about maintaining links. I wonder if there's an opportunity just to provide, because I'm certain that these reports are templates, at the very, very end to provide a disclosure and maybe some asterisks or footnotes where these resources were pulled from, and then the links are just there as well if someone gets curious to dig into it.
Right, yeah. There is like at least one or two footnotes that have those, but we can certainly do that more obviously and more thoroughly. It's not everywhere, for
But
sure.
only like make it template based, not to create more work all the
Correct.
time, but
Yeah.
something that would just
Yeah.
roll with the template.
Commissioner Bennett?
I also wanted to echo Commissioner Lampman's appreciation for staff putting this together. I'm sure it is a labor of love. I'm sure it takes time. I do these for projects that I work on, so I definitely see the usefulness, but I also know it takes a lot of time, and I appreciate you being responsive to our comments and pulling this together. I find it very useful. I find the questions, for me, even more useful than just the tables, because I know just looking at the tables, I could see someone in the general public maybe wondering, why is this relevant? But when you read the question, especially that some of them are so thoughtfully answered, then you see, okay, this is why this makes sense. This is why this is relevant. And so I was really excited when this piece got added. And I know sometimes the conversation is uncomfortable. Sometimes the public does, why are you talking about that? What do you mean my neighborhood had these covenants or what? We don't have it now. But history is important, and we learn a lot from history. And I just appreciate you all being bold and having the uncomfortable conversations and helping us have the uncomfortable conversations sometimes. And I think it's very useful.
A lot of that goes to the staff, and who you hire too. So, great choices.
You will see a lot more choices
And
soon.
we do not need to take an action on this, so
No.
we will just await another update or more information. I believe Mr. Myers is dying to give me more information.
Oh, sure.
I was going to ask the commission a question. And so one of the reasons that Ira's presentation didn't cover transportation is because I'm trying to hire a position that will take over a fair amount of the coordination of this role, and wanted to postpone making any big changes until we had somebody to help implement them and make them their own. But one of the questions that if you have a response, I'd love to hear is compare, like right now, the transportation section goes into, basically it's a lot of text. One of the things we thought about doing is basically automating some production of maps and not writing anything for that stuff, just having a map, and then maybe have some stuff about policies or discussions or things that are complicated. And some people might like it written down where they can read it and quote it and kind of understand it, but other people are more visual. And I'm curious to hear if you guys have strong reactions to those ideas.
Just for an example, perhaps a map of adjacent nearby transportation projects that are moving forward. Is that?
That would be one map we could potentially do. Another one would be, instead of describing which sides of the street and where sidewalks are, just here's a map of sidewalks and here's a site highlighted as a for instance.
That would be very helpful.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I also thought this might be an opportunity to confirm that. So thank you.
Commissioner Lampman?
If you do data maps, because I think like TOD has like maps that can show like recent traffic markers and stuff. I've seen this in South Carolina. I don't know if North Carolina has it per se, but
I mean, traffic counts.
yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking of. But so your mind was not going there. That's where my mind went, is if it was data driven on those types of maps, you might require more feedback than just, but if you're talking about pictures with sidewalks,
Gotcha.
that's super easy.
Right.
But-
If we gave you a map of traffic counts,
Yeah.
how do you interpret that? What is
Right.
exactly?
So-
And I wouldn't
So would
necessarily
level of
think
service
that.
be more appropriate for a map like that so we can see the?
It's not
level?
really possible to produce a map of level of service. That's, I mean, you can use a traffic impact analysis report results and then put them on a map. But there is no level of service data that we can just pull from to make a map.
Oh, okay.
And to be honest, if you look at the actual TIAs, which we don't usually include those in the staff reports, sometimes parts of those things are put in the reviews, which are in the staff reports. Different firms that do that work represent it kind of graphically in different ways. It ends up usually being pretty dense and a little bit difficult to parse out the things, which is where we get into the discussion of text starts to describe that better. But we might be able to think about that a little bit differently.
What about bus routes?
Yeah, that is another one where it's very easy for us to put on a map.
Map, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very cool idea.
Thanks for entertaining me.
I will always entertain you. Okay, it's good stuff. Okay, so if there are no other comments, we will await some updates or more information from the planning department. So that concludes all of the discussion items on our agenda. I'll also note it's 9:52. Good job, everybody. The draft minutes from our February 28th Planning Commission meeting are in the backup. If there are no comments or recommended edits, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Lampman?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from February 28th.
Thank you. And is there a second? And that was Commissioner Lampman making a motion to recommend approval of the minutes from February 28th and Commissioner Otwell offering a second. If there's no additional discussion, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to other business, report of the chair. During the March 7th meeting, Dean Rains was reappointed to the Planning Commission for a second term. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Rains. All right. And I believe we have scheduled an alternative date for a COW meeting in April. The 26th? Okay.
Oh, great.
And then I will move on to report of members, and we'll just go down the line. No report? Commissioner Bennett?
Infrastructure and Mobility is scheduled to meet on March 23rd at 3, unless Mr. Myers would like to wait until he's made some of the changes he wants to make and then come to the committee.
of static in here. I will not be in the office next week, and my colleague Ann Conlon is preparing a presentation about practices and everything. The changes that we're talking about are going to probably take 6 months to implement. And that is before we get into policy changes and code changes and things, but just in terms of the staff report content, because we have to re-advertise, interview, hopefully have people to interview this time and, train and then have them do that work. So I don't see a reason to postpone that, but that's really up to you. And I'm sure Ann can prepare and be ready for next month if you'd rather postpone a little bit.
If we're postponing Cal, I just hate for people to.
No, I think
we're
we have a March Cal meeting. It's the
okay.
April meeting has
It's
a
the
special
April
date.
meeting. Okay, then yes. So March 23rd at 3, infrastructure and mobility. We'll meet and we'll talk about traffic. And also, I've been getting a lot of emails from the public asking about submitting presentations for our meetings. Is there a specific link they're supposed to use to do that, or do they just email and copy the case planner?
The historical practice has been to email the case planner directly. So that's also how applicants do it. As far as I'm aware, that's still how we do it. There's not for city council, there is an email address that you email your presentations to for everyone, applicants also. And our TN staff has those ready. For planning commission, I think mainly emailing individual case planners is still how we do it. And then we all get our stuff on this machine.
And the case planner is indicated on the.
Yeah, it's in the so if they get a letter for planning commission, it's our contact information is listed. It's
Okay.
listed on the website. If you go to the list of cases, there's my last name or whoever's you can click on it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Okay. Commissioner Raines?
For text change, we have a meeting tomorrow. We have one item, mobile retail, that includes food trucks. I will not be bringing any food, so sorry. See you there.
Okay. And Commissioner Mann?
Excuse me, I don't have anything.
Okay. Commissioner Otwell? Commissioner Dato? And Commissioner Lehman?
Nothing for strategic planning. However, we are open to suggestions and feedback. If anybody has anything that they would like to drill into or talk about or discuss or open up. I know we've had some comments about missing middle housing and opportunities to dig into that a little bit based on the user experience, but open to suggestions based on Planning Commission recommendation.
Actually, I would be interested, maybe strategic planning is the appropriate place to do it. Just an inventory, a report out of the number of affordable units that have resulted from conditional language. I'm guessing it's a thin report, but I'm just curious. Just the number of cases that use that, and then the number of actual built units.
I
as a
guess it's
result.
0, but
Yeah.
just due to the length of time they've been in effect and how long development projects take. But I can certainly reply to that.
Would it be possible to dig into the concepts a little bit deeper as to what the feedback has been about the effectiveness of some of the text changes from the community?
Which text changes in particular?
Primarily missing middle, but also like the upzoning opportunities for the TOD. But again, to your point, it hasn't been in effect that long, but maybe feedback we've received. I mean, and I don't know how far we want to go down the rabbit hole of what's worked in other cities. I know that North Carolina being a Dillon state, kind of limits our opportunities, but there's a lot of other Dillon states as well. So, we're one of many. But I don't know how far down that rabbit hole. I mean, we could.
I can pass that. There's been a lot of work from the More Housing, More Choices team.
Maybe that's just what it is, just a
So I will pass that along to them
a
and see.
summary of what occurred at those meetings.
And I do know Keegan left already, but was a big part of that team. They're working on a summary to council of all that feedback from all those events.
That'd be good.
So I will alert them, and there might be
Yeah. And
more
credit
contact
to-
with the chair of that committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Credit to Dwight for initiating some of this conversation as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Moving on to a report of the Assistant Director, represented today by Mr. Justin Rometta.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Fox. Clearly, I'm not Bynum. Thanks for letting me sit with you all today. That's a good segue. I did, your report's attached in the backup, but I did just want to highlight that staff is presenting the feedback from the missing middle sessions to council on March 21st, in the report session. So staff's gathered all the feedback that was received during those meetings, and we'll be presenting it to council to give them options as to what they do with that and how they go forward with those. The companion piece to that is the small-scale home builders workshop, and that's on March 31st at 8:30 a.m. So that's kind of getting into the nuts and bolts with builders and users of the text change as to how they can effectively use those changes to develop missing middle housing.
Oh,
Looks
Justin.
like your agenda. I'm sorry. Looks like your agendas for your upcoming meetings are a little fuller for today. You've got 6 cases currently scheduled for the 28th and 5 for the 11th, April 11th.
Excellent.
Yeah. This was a weird fluke. Please don't get used to no zoning cases.
I enjoy a good fluke. Anyway.
Happy birthday.
If there is nothing else for the good of the order, I think that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you.